Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Katie Burke.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Before we get started, I'd like to give you a little context of this interview. In this interview, I am at the North American Decoy Collector Show in Chicago. I'm interviewing Rick Sandstrom, the president of the North American Decoy Collectors Association. And at this show, for the first couple of days, there's room-to-room trading amongst decoy collectors and waterfowl artifact collectors, literally hotel room to hotel room, floors 1 through 6. And then it's followed by an auction by Gaia and Dieter and a 2-day open showroom for the public to come and buy and collect decoys as well. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Rick Sandstrom. Hey, Rick, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming on.
I'm grateful to spend time with you.
Yeah, I haven't got to see you since 2019. So.
Well, it's nothing's normal these days, and we're all trying to navigate our way through this.
Yes, and I'm glad to be back. So one thing I'd like to start with before we get into the show and the Collecting Association is your background. When did you start collecting? Were you hunting before you were collecting? What's your intro into this whole world of waterfowl and decoys?
Well, I grew up in northern Minnesota, okay, and I place called Hoy Lakes in Grand Rapids, so I kind of grew up in the North Woods. And my dad was a pilot, so I spent a lot of time in the air, and I spent a lot of time outside. But my real first immersion into this whole world that I've been so fascinated with is, first of all, when I was up flying, I would be up in the air with the ducks and the geese. Yeah. So I'm moving around in Minnesota and Ontario and different places. So I sort of was fascinated watching their flight and what they do and how they just seem to know where to go. But then when I was 12, that was my first opportunity to go to duck camp with Grandpa and my dad. And it was a great experience because I had to save my money for my paper route and buy a gun. And I got to be sick from school because we went at noon on Wednesday for the opening. And so I went to duck camp and it was sort of a tradition. My grandfather was a farmer, but he hunted to have other protein, and it was a tradition to go to duck camp. My dad had gone there, and so I got to go when I was 12. And I fell in love with it in that first trip because I was outside doing a lot of things I want to do, and I saved from the hunting trip. I saved a decoy that my grandfather had carved, and I still have it.
Oh, so your decoy and hunting kind of were all in one.
Yeah. So I grew up in northern Minnesota in a small town. We were the first residents of the town as a family. So I spent a lot of time outdoors, and so this was it. I spent time in floodplains, and I spent time hunting grouse and out. And of course, there's a lot of lakes in northern Minnesota, so we spent a lot of time there. And the place that I got introduced to is, Pelican Lake up by Cook. And what's unique about it is there are celery beds and wild rice there, and the canvasbacks would come and the bluebills. And so it was, really pretty special. But, when you're a kid, everything's sort of new.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it was my grandfather's carving that attracted to me, and so that's kind of what got me started. And so, from northern Minnesota, I grew up, got out of high school, went to the university, ended up going in the Army, flew helicopters, moved all around the world, but I loved to go duck hunting, and so I went duck hunting in a lot of different places, and I was interested to, because I was flying and moving around the world, I was interested to see them in Europe, to see them when we went to South America, to Mexico, different places. So they were everywhere, and so I sort of this has sort of been a part of my life.
Yeah, so this is off topic, but I was just curious. With hunting, like overseas and different places, what would you say are like the significant differences in the hunting ducks in those areas compared to what we're used to?
Yeah, our culture, and our country is very special about that because we grew up as our country was evolving. All this was a part of how you fed your family, where you lived. If you were on the prairie, I mean, it was all part of everybody had a gun because they were, trying to make their way in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's not true in any other place I've ever been. So, for us, it's a part of our culture. It's a part of who we are and how our country has evolved and developed and all of that stuff. So in other places, like it's a thing that royalty does, and it's not necessarily available, and they don't have all the natural resources and the capability that we have, and so it's unique.
Yeah,
and it's a part of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of evolved all along. And the decoys are just a part of what do I need? What are the tools that I need to sort of do this?
Right.
And so, but it's evolved, as our country has evolved and sort of things have evolved. And I guess the thing that I would say the most that I would think about is that we have tremendous resources in our country, more than any place else, but there's also a tremendous amount of pressure on them. And so that pressure from the evolution of our society and how things are going creates a lot of, pressure on the ducks and where they live, how they operate. They've adapted, but I spend a lot of time on habitat. It's really important. When you look around, the ducks can't live a lot of places. And by the way, neither can people because it's not all that hospitable too. So when you look at it, there's this balance that you have to have. And if the ducks are doing well, we're doing well.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so if you pay attention to that, you can see when the balance is right, they thrive. They thrive, but they can't live in a parking lot, right? So
yeah, you mentioned a wild celery, like you hunted over. Well, that's like not really.
We can't find it.
It's not. It exists anymore.
Yeah, and the wild rice that we had up there. I mean, I still get wild rice from the Indians. The Indian reservation is right where we hunted, and the wild rice is still the native wild rice is still in northern Minnesota, but it's all being challenged.
Yeah.
Right. And so the trick is where's that balance?
Right.
Right.
And we're working on it every day.
Yeah. Well, we have to. We have to. I mean, the reality is that it's kind of this way. I flew in combat and it was challenging. And, I love our country. And our country in the world is a really special place, resource-wise, and our culture and our people. I mean, it's a special place. And we've been able to do a lot. But the challenge is never ending.
Yeah.
And that you have to be thinking that you have to be a better you each day. And you have to figure out how to make the environment better. Because if you make a better world, then you have a better life.
Right.
And if we can make this world where we can live in harmony with the ducks and all that's associated with it, then I think we have better balance.
Right. And it has to have that balance, which we're seeing more and more today.
So with that, okay,
Yeah.
then so what about this organization that I'm a part of, and what is it all about? And so it started as Midwest Decoy Group. In 1966, a bunch of people got together from around the country, and they realized that if they got together, they knew more together than they knew by themselves. This is exactly what DU is thinking.
Yeah.
Right? If we can get together and collaborate, we can do more. So they got together in 1966. It was just a show of people who got together for the weekend to say, I have these things, and I'm going to show them. And they figured out really quickly that we could learn a lot from each other.
Yeah.
And so what it was happening in Maryland was happening for a very specific purpose, because it's Chesapeake Bay and there's a certain pattern there, and that was different from the Illinois River, and that was different from upstate New York, and that was different from New Hampshire and Long Island and the Cape. And so they figured pretty quickly that there was a lot to learn. So as an organization, we evolved into educational seminars, getting together once a year. We figured out that, people could come together, and we wanted to do it in the spring because in the fall we're all busy out in the field and we might be hunting and doing all that stuff. So in the spring was a good time. And by the way, that's the time when the ducks are on the move. They're headed all up north. We see them as they come through here. And so it seemed like a natural. And so we've sort of evolved now since 1966. We evolved from a Midwest focus and to be in a North American organization. We've got, every area represented. We have members in all the states. And so we get together once a year, and it's a tremendous opportunity to learn. And you're learning about, like this week, I've been talking to people. What was the hunting season like in California? And how was it for you up in North Dakota? And then what happened over in Missouri? And geez, there was snow goose hunting here. And what happened to the canvasbacks in Maryland? So we're talking to all those people. And then in the end, the reason that we are focused on the carvers and the decoys is because these are the people that are interpreting our culture and our society. And the really good carvers have sort of the spirit of the duck, and they create these things that become the artifacts that sort of preserve our history. And so now these things take on different forms. And some of them are very simple, but they all had a purpose of, if you go all the way back to the Plymouth and Captain Osgood, these famous geese, they had a purpose. They had a purpose in trying to help the hunter be successful in harvesting, right? To eat and have protein and all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting how it's evolved when we come together, because people are looking at these things from different perspectives. Very quickly, you're in an environment where you're talking to different people and you're learning different things, and you're talking about different techniques. You're talking about how was the weather in your area and what was the migration like this fall, and what decoys did you use and how did they work? And when this guy was carving in the 1900s, why was he doing that? And so it sort of has evolved. So you can see the organization is a wide range of people that have an interest in this area. Some are interested in art. Some are interested in the carving aspect. Others are interested in the tool itself and how you use it and the techniques. Others are interested in the painting and the form. So it's an integration of a lot of part of our society, but it also, we find in our organization, it's an integration of a wide part of our culture, and it brings us together into something that's just really important, and that is we learn more from each other, and it happens really quickly.
Yeah.
Because you're networking, you're bumping into people in the hallway and you're saying, okay, with this or that or whatever. And then and all of a sudden you made a connection. And now I'm in the position where no matter where I travel, there's a collector there and I can stop and see them. And, they're always, it's a big network now, and it made the world smaller.
Right.
So isn't that great? And if you're young and you're wondering, why would I do this? I mean, there's a wide range of people. Some of them are not even working. They're retired. Some of them are carvers. You do it because there's so much more awareness you get from talking to people that have a different perspective. And they all have an interest in conservation, in the ducks, and the carving, and the artwork, and the resources associated with it, and the history behind it. And so there's just a lot of sort of integrating our culture and learning from each other.
Speaking of being here, the act of picking up a decoy in front of someone who has that experience with it and letting them tell you is just vital. And you don't get that anywhere else, really.
Right.
I have a question about, why do you think the Midwest Decoy Association, why is this show and this collector association the one that grew to be everyone came from all over to this one? Why? Because there's a lot of collectors associations, but this one.
It's really interesting in that in the Midwest, we're pretty open. We've sort of grown in an environment that is sort of rich in the habitat around that, and we've always had this hunting aspect. We have these changes of seasons and an integration of a lot of people that immigrated to this area to develop the area. And our nature is to be welcoming. Mm-hmm. And so where some organizations can become a little bit tribal and that they're very focused on a very small part, and that's really important. But we seem to always be still pretty open to all the different things that were going on, because Michigan wasn't Wisconsin, it's not Minnesota, it's nothing like as you get to the farm areas in Illinois and Iowa, and then there was things that went along the Mississippi River. And so I think we had enough sort of recognition that we were different, that all these other little things just sort of fit into the puzzle.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what happened. And then there's one other thing, and that is in the Midwest, we don't have the stress that some of these other areas have of big, dense populations and a lot of the structure that comes from older areas where they can't really evolve that much. And we don't have some of the issues that they have in some of those areas. So for us, we've always been sort of more open, right, and sort of more welcoming, just because we have more space,
right,
and we're a little bit more closer to nature in how we are, and so that just makes us different in how we behave.
And I'm sure being just geographically central helps as well.
Yeah, well, there's another reason, and that is we have the Mississippi River and the Mississippi Flyway right in the middle of who we are.
Right.
And it connects us to Delta Marsh up into Canada, and all these ducks and geese are coming right through this area, and just so it needs, and then in the spring, they all go someplace to winter, and then they're all coming back, and so we're sort of used to sort of that sort of mentality. And so, we're real anxious to know what was the hunt like in Louisiana this spring, because they left here and went south.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get a sense for what's the population like, and then we see it coming north and how it's changed in the colors and all that stuff. And we're like in Iowa, the ducks will be there for a few weeks, and there'll be lots and lots of them, and they're ready to go north, but they can't because it's still too much snow and ice and everything. So they're sort of staged there.
Okay.
So it seemed to be natural to stage here in the Midwest in the spring, because it was comfortable.
Mm-hmm. I never thought about that. I grew up in Mississippi, and I never think about. I mean, I know this, but I didn't think about it in that sense. As someone who lives here, that they leave and then you get to have them come back, because when they come to Mississippi, they're there and then they leave. They don't. It's not enough time passes from Mississippi to Louisiana back to Mississippi. It's just we have them basically for 3 months, and then we don't have them anymore.
Yeah.
But I never think about it that way. You have.
So I think that sort of has shaped the culture of our organization, and then the fact that we sort of got this Midwest hospitality, and it sort of matches really well with what's going on with what we're doing. And we're very close to it. I mean, we don't have to travel far to hunt. I mean, it's here.
Yeah, that's
right?
huge. Yeah.
It's just here.
Yeah.
Right? So it's sort of natural. And it was here when we were pioneers, right? I mean, if you go back into the 1800s when this area was being developed, I mean, the ducks were here, and it was part of the culture to feed your family. And I mean, it was all just sort of an extension of what you should be doing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's a way to think about it, but it's a good question. And, we work hard. We really do. We work hard to learn, and I've lived in a lot of different places. I know what the migration is like out in Washington State and all those areas, and Alaska and all the things, because I've flown everywhere. But I think that's what really has shaped us.
Yeah.
And for a long time, we were the Midwest group, but we had people attending from all over the country.
Right.
And people would say, well, but it's really not the Midwest. It's much bigger than that. And we recognized that. We said, yeah, you're right. We need to adapt, just like we all need to do to our environment, and like the ducks have to do, and so we've sort of been evolving and adapting.
So, with that change, when you come to North America, there's all these other smaller groups. How does that change your role in supporting them? And because they're obviously smaller than you, but how you because it almost makes you the parent, the first stop for a lot of people coming into collecting.
Yeah, we need local success because that's where people live. And our mission, we say we want to discover and preserve and celebrate. But our mission really, we're a nonprofit, we're an educational organization, but our mission really is to provide the infrastructure and the framework. Our website reaches everybody. We get through all of our links to thousands of people. Our mission really is to try to raise all boats. We need everybody to be successful because not everybody can travel all over the country, and not everybody wants to.
Right.
But we need to collaborate. We help them to promote things. We share ideas. We try to provide staffing support. We're really trying to, if you will, provide the umbrella, set the policy, have the framework, let our website be free flowing. We're right in the middle of redoing all that because of everything that's going on, and so really our job is to provide as much knowledge and education as we can, and then provide the learning so that everybody can be everything they can be. Right? That's what we need. Yeah. I mean, that's what we need in our society.
Yeah.
We need people to recognize their individual, who they are, what their talents are, and then in order to make the world better, they need to go be everything they can be. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
We need everybody in the game. We need everybody to do what they're really good at.
Right.
Right? And so if Potomac is really good at being focused at that and what they've learned and build that infrastructure and we all can learn from it and why that stuff was done, that's great. And up at Cape Cod, there's a little different thing that has to be learned, and there's a longer history and all that sort of and that's sort of, but with that in mind, this year's educational seminars were chosen a few years ago, and we have very specific reasons. In the early 1900s, when these two areas in the fish decoy area, it's Peterson, Oscar Peterson, and the decoys it's Elmer Crowell or Crowell, depending if you're from the Midwest or from the Cape. But there was something going on then in that world, and that is they were moving from market hunting and making their living hunting ducks. That was changing. There was a world war that was going on. There was a Spanish flu that was going around the world. There were a lot of forces that were reshaping things. And these carvers emerged with a lot of talent and this sort of understanding of how to interpret the duck and the environment and all that stuff. And they're noteworthy. So there's a lot to learn from that. But it also helps to think about how history is shaping and we have to adapt. And we've got a lot of forces going on right now, like with what's happening in our world and how COVID has impacted how we behave. And, all those sort of things are things that we're dealing with. So taking time to focus on the lessons that's learned, what these very talented people have done to interpret. See, in the end, these artifacts that they create are what survives. They are, they've got the spirit of the duck in them or whatever it is, the shorebird or the goose or whatever, and they're interpreting it and they're bringing that spirit of nature and the duck into what that thing is, and it ends up, these things end up being a big message. Right? And as you start to handle them, you begin to understand it.
Oh, yeah.
And it helps us to be more connected to nature, because that's where the ducks are living, right? And to think more about the balance associated with all that.
Mm-hmm. And, what's interesting in that is like, I found the more I've done research and been and talked to people, like, and then working at DU and the problems we have in conservation and with ducks, it's cyclical. It's a lot of the problems they face, we're facing again, and it continues to kind of like go on this like wheel, basically. And having these items and these artifacts around really like helps remind us that we've been here before.
Right.
Right. There was the era when Crowell was around, and it was affluent. We had ducks everywhere, but he also lived when that population dipped again.
Right.
And you can kind of see like the changes he made
Yep.
to do that. He did more decorative stuff, like
Right.
those
Right.
you can kind of learn, and it shows us and reminds us that like we've been here before. We can solve this again. Like it kind of gives hope. I like to be hopeful about it.
Well,
yeah.
I am because when I think about my grandfather, okay, and I think about what he lived in. He lived on the farm. He worked for the railroad. He hunted in his spare time. You know, he went fishing. He did these things to feed his family. Okay. And I think about what they lived in when he was born and, and all that sort of stuff and how we live now. I mean, we've got a lot of challenges, but look, the lights are on. The air conditioning's working. We can feed our families. Oh, we're challenged, but not like they were, right? And then there's another thing to think about. There was a President Roosevelt, okay, who kind of was in New York and he had health problems. He went to South Dakota, he became president, and he really, really understood we needed to think about conservation and better balance.
Yeah.
And so that message was happening when all these things were going on, right? And that message is coming right back at us.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, right? Wake up, pay attention. The balance is not right.
Yeah.
Right? What we do makes a difference.
Oh,
right?
100%.
When I talk to farmers or I talk to carvers, a lot of times people say, well, there's no ducks. And when I talk to the farmers about conservation, as I do a lot of that because, I love to be out there. But I say to them, well, I'm looking around your farm and didn't you used to have a lot of ducks and pheasants and things? And they say, yeah. And I said, well, look around. You couldn't live out there.
Yeah.
You couldn't live out there. So how do you think the duck is going to live out there? Right?
Right.
And so they kind of look at it, they go, I said, we got to figure this out. I mean, we got to get some filter strips. We got to do some other things, right? You couldn't live out there. The ducks can't live out there. So I think we have to adapt, right? And so once you kind of have those conversations and when we're together, like this week when everybody's together, there's a lot of those conversations going about what are we going to do so that we know that this is good for us.
Right.
Right? We know if the ducks are doing well, our environment's doing well.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So how are we going to adapt, right, to help them be successful? Because if you make a better world, you have a better life, right? So if we keep discussing that, we spend a lot of time on that stuff, and of course, the carvers have a way with their talent of taking this block of wood and shaping something that brings the spirit of that into something you can see and touch and relate to. And so I think that's where the sort of the magic all comes together with what we do. So you get to see a lot of people with a lot of perspectives. Like fingerprints, we're all different. We spend a lot of time listening to each other because we can learn. The more of that we can get done, the better the solutions are, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of, and if I talk about my leadership style and what our organization has to do, that's kind of where we're going, right? That's kind of where we need to be. We need to keep reinforcing about we need to engage more people. There are no dumb questions. That perspective and that angle is not what we see. Maybe we're not looking at it correctly. We learned this from this or that. I think that, there's just a lot of good in that.
Yeah.
And it's very good energy.
Right.
One of the things you'll feel when you're here, and I know you feel it this week, is people are so glad to be together. They're talking about good things, right?
Yeah.
It makes them feel stronger, right?
Yeah, you can tell they've missed it, too.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we did miss it.
Yeah.
We're so much better when we can be together, especially when there's a challenge.
Right.
Because if it was obvious, you'd be doing it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? It's not.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So, a lot of what is being traded around here is older, but with that in mind, like what we just said, like the importance of nurturing young carvers, what do you think that is for in this kind of situation?
Well, let me tell you a story now, because I think this story it'll go back to when we started this discussion. When I was 12, I was out with my grandfather, and we were hunting, and it was the very first time. And then the next week, my grandfather took me out. We snuck through the woods, and we went to this place, and it was by the celery beds or where the river was, and it was a little sort of an opening by the trees. And we were there for a couple of hours, and I kept saying to my grandfather, I said, "What are we doing?" He said, "Shh, be quiet, just watch. And so we're there, and we're watching, and all of a sudden this flock of 8 canvasbacks came. There were 5 drakes and 3 hens, and they came zooming right along, and they came right along the celery beds, and they came right into this little opening by the trees, by the edge, and they landed right there, and they immediately went to sleep. And I thought that my grandpa said, "We never hunt here. They always come to this spot because they know it's safe. They go to sleep right away because it's been a long trip from Canada, and they're here because they know there's food and they need to rest." And I was like in awe, because it was like, how did they know to do that?
Right.
It was windy, right? And then they were flying together, and they came, and they knew exactly where they're going, and they got there, and they knew it was safe, and they went to sleep. They turned their heads back. So I told that story to Cameron McIntyre, okay?
And just so that the audience know, we've interviewed him before, so go back and listen.
Yeah, and I know you've heard from Cameron, and Cameron has the spirit of the duck in him, because he spent a lot of time in the marsh, and he knows how to do. So Cameron took a tool from the 1800s from England, a spoke shave, and he took a single piece of wood, and he carved these sleeping canvasbacks that totally captured that moment. And now it's preserved.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And Cameron, what he was able to do just immediately captured that experience. And he had seen it happen one time in his marsh, where a hen canvasback came and landed and went to sleep, and he didn't understand why. And so when we were talking, I said to Cameron, "I learned from my grandpa a long time ago. They knew that was a safe place. They'd been on a long trip. They needed a place to sort of rest and restore. And they understood that was their place in nature and where they should be."
Yeah, they remember. Yeah.
So Cameron captured that, and I have those in my hunting rig. There's a pair of them, and the hen has her nose under the feather, and they're all one piece, and they're carved, but when you look at them, you can see all of that.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so the magic is, here's somebody who has a talent, who can interpret our world into something that survives.
Yeah.
And it's a thing when anybody who looks at it can see the canvasback is the king of the marsh. These cans are resting in a place of peace. They're on the water, they float, they look beautiful, but it's clear that they're all in balance, and they knew what they were doing, and that's what allows them to survive. And so Cameron got all that in this carving, and when you see it, instantly you can see it. I'll show you pictures of it, and I'll even give you some if you want to use, because they're wonderful creations. And I tell that story to my grandkids, and they see them, and we go to the marsh, and I don't know if they'll ever see the canvasbacks do it, but they understand the story. They have the memory. They understand the canvasback and what it was doing and why it was doing that. And so there's a lot of learning in all that.
Yeah, and it gives them that
connection.
Yeah, that it's hard to describe. Cameron and I, in our interview, we talked about that connection a lot, and that it's kind of just a feeling. It's not really something you can describe, but to pass that connection down to the next generation is so important.
And so that was one of the things that when I would go flying was so impressive to me is I'd be up there in the air flying around and these ducks are up there going where I needed a lot of help to figure out where to go, but they knew where to go.
Yeah, that's a lucky perspective.
They knew where to go, and I'd be up there with them, and they'd be flying around, some be going this, that way, but they knew exactly where they were going. I could see them up above the clouds, and they knew where to go, and they didn't have instruments. They didn't have everybody talking to them. Instinctively, they knew what to do, and so we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah.
We can learn a lot from that.
Well, that's a really, I'll ask you one follow-up question, but that's a really good place to kind of end. But before we go, I just want to is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't talked about the show and the Decoys Collector Association that's important that our listeners know about before we sign off?
Yeah. I think here's what I think. We're all different. Our fingerprints are different, our irises are different, our voices are different, our immune systems are different. We all have sort of unique talent in the world. And that different perspective causes each of us to see things a little bit differently. And we see that in our organization. And if you can learn to listen and recognize that other people see something a little bit differently than you do, and there's a reason, and you won't understand it because they're different, there's a lot to learn. And I see that when we get together. There's just a lot for us to learn that will allow us to make the world better. I mean, it does. Because we can see our organization, the energy builds, people look forward to it all year long. They meet people they never would have a chance to meet. They learn more about the country. They learn more about our history. They learn about what's going on in business, how people are adapting to COVID, all these sort of things. It's just irreplaceable to be together and to learn from each other.
Yes, I think sometimes we forget in this time that we are a social animal. And we need to not just be on screens, but physically in front of each other, which is really nice about this because I haven't got to do an in-person interview in forever, and it makes such a difference.
Well, and think about the ducks for a few minutes. They don't travel alone.
No, never.
They don't. They know better.
Yeah.
Right? They need their community, right? They learn from each other.
Yeah.
They're paying attention to each other. They're flying in formation. They know where to go and feed. If they land someplace and there's no food, they're not staying. Right? They're on the move.
Yep.
Right? And they know because they pass down their knowledge. Right? I think there's a great opportunity for us if we can listen and relax a little bit and have a little better balance. I think we can do great things.
Well, thank you so much. This was really fun. Thanks again to our guest, Rick Sandstrom, for coming on the show and taking the time to talk with me. And always thanks to our producer, Chris Isaac, and thanks to you, our listeners, for supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.